Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the 2020 Northampton Town Candidates Night, put on by the Northampton Business Association. I want to first say a special thanks to the Channel 22 crew for Northampton Community Media, and just give you some names who's behind there helping this all go smoothly. We've got Luke Benerick, Troy Claderis, Grayson George, and John Savastano. So thank you to them and getting us on the air and keeping us on time tonight. My name is Joe Mitica. I get to be your moderator here for third year in a row. You guys are getting used to me. Some of you knew who I was this year, so that's good. I serve as the president of the Northampton Business Association. I run a business here in town as well. I am not a resident, full disclosure. So I don't get the honor of getting to vote like the rest of you, but I hope that all of you will make sure that you vote next week, March 10th. As president of the Business Association, I want to say that we're very proud to be a part of tonight and helping it make it happen. We believe very strongly in a working and positive relationship with both the town, the residents, and the business community. It's my seventh year here as president of the Business Association. I've been almost 10 years now here as a business owner in town, and what I will tell you is I've always been very impressed by the passion that each of you have for how your town operates and how much you love your town, okay? Saying that as someone who lives in another town. Our goal here tonight is to give you, the local residents, some insight and opportunity to learn more about the candidates running for local office. The rules for tonight are going to be as follows. Each candidate in the competitive races, and that's all we're going to hear from for tonight, will have the opportunity to make a 2-minute opening statement. We will then have questions from the audience. That's what this microphone in the center is for. For those questions, the only ask I have of you is that you keep them as efficient and succinct as possible, all right? So we can hear more from the candidates and as much from the candidates as possible tonight. We'll ask that if you do step up and have a question, that you keep it to one question, just so we can fit in as many people as possible. One question per candidate. You can certainly come up for other candidates, for other races following. At that period of questions, we will cap at 20 minutes. Okay, for each race. We have 4 competitive races to go through tonight. We're doing that because, well, if you were here last year, we went quite a while into the night last year. I'm trying to avoid that, not just for my own sake. Following that question period, we will offer each candidate a 2-minute closing statement if they wish. All right. Let's see here. We're going to go ahead and get started, and we will go in this order. First, we are going to have the Budget Committee, then the Planning Board, Library Trustees, and then the Select Board. So we will go in that order this evening. Can I ask that Angela Blattis and Jonathan Panett please come up? Did I get that right? Bladis. Thank you for bringing your name cards too. So we'll do it in this order throughout the night. We'll go the farthest from me. So Angela, why don't you kick us off with your opening statement?
Sure. Thank you for coming this evening. My name is Angela Bladis. I have been a resident of Northampton for about a little over 2 years. I, by trade, am an occupational therapist. I currently run a private practice, and I have no idea why I did this, but my oral presentation or defense for my doctorate was last night, and so I'm here tonight with you. So apparently I like stress, and I actually went to the town hall and just tried to see what positions were open and not contested, and this was one of the positions until just at the last minute it became a contested race. So here I am today, and that's pretty much it.
My name is
Jonathan.
Jonathan Panett. I've been a resident in Northampton for, over 20 years, probably closer to 25, 26 years. My background is basically finance, and the reason for me putting my name on the ballot is just to get another understanding of exactly how the town works, and for me to obviously volunteer. So currently, I'm in a few committees, mainly the Budget Committee, which I chair. And my background, like I said, is finance, so I'm pretty detail-oriented, and I run a pretty tight ship with things. So regarding managing revenue, managing cash flow, and banking, that's pretty much what my expertise is. So that's pretty much it.
Okay. So we have any questions for either Jonathan or Angela running for town treasurer, in case anybody's confused from my earlier statements? No questions from the audience? Someone's got to have a question. Oh, Phil. And for everybody, when you ask your question, if you don't mind just stating your name.
Kathleen Kilgore, 220 Atlantic Avenue. Jonathan, could you please list all the positions, all the committees you are currently serving on in the town of Northampton, please?
Yes, so I'm currently chairing the Budget Committee, vice chair of the Zoning Board. I'm a member of the EDC Committee. I'm the town representative for SAU 21, and I'm currently the chair of the Ethics Committee.
Thank you.
Bill Wilson, running his drive. I was really going to ask a question only because I thought nobody else was going to almost ran over somebody. But nevertheless, I'll ask the question. In 2008, there was a significant financial crisis, and a lot of effort was made by the Select Board to perfect our investments to ensure that in the event of the collapse of a bank, the town did not lose its pretty sizable fund balances that are invested. And I'm wondering how each of you would react to whether that policy that was established in 2008 is still sufficient.
So I'm going to answer that question as best I can, unless would you like to go first on that? So to ensure that the town doesn't lose money is what I'm basically hearing here. Typically with banking institutions, I know that they're federally insured up to $250,000 for current savings and so forth. As far as mutual bonds and funds, I'm not sure exactly what funds and what accounts that the town currently has. But I'm a pretty conservative person, and I would do everything that I could possibly do to make sure that the town does not lose any money based on any type of investments or and so forth. And I know that I mentioned that my background was finance. 50% of it is finance, 50% of it is in the collections. So I actually ran a collection firm with basically personal lines. So these basically people that owed money all the way
But the other candidate answered
Okay.
two issues.
Sure, I think that was a great question, especially with the way the market has been so volatile right now. I know that everybody's kind of hinging because of the coronavirus and how it's going to impact just everyone in general. And as a town and a community, I agree that probably the conservative approach is the best and safest approach.
Okay. Any other questions for the two of them? If you guys want to make a closing statement, you're welcome to, but it's up to you.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll just close with, I'm happy that I have stepped up and tried to be a part of this community. It's something that I wasn't always able to do because I've always worked out of state and had multiple jobs, and because I now have a private practice, it just allowed me that opportunity. So I just wanted to try to become an active member.
My closing statement is, I love the town. I will do the best that I possibly can to ensure that with this position, it is done to the best of my ability. And I appreciate everyone coming out tonight, and vote for John Panett.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, just to clarify, we're going to go to Planning Board, then Budget Committee, and then Select Board. I forgot to introduce you to one of our friends for this evening, though, too, and I'm glad we didn't need it yet. For the candidates that are up here, we're going to try to be as strict as possible on the time, and I realize sometimes that's tough. So when you have hit you're up against the time limit as a candidate, I'm going to do this on the podium, so just kind of listen to that. Try to not be too obnoxious. I will get more obnoxious if you continue to keep going well past the time, all right? So hopefully I don't have to use this tonight. I don't want to be that guy, but all right. So for Planning Board, can I call up Bill Kibbe, Nancy Moynihan, Scott Baker, and Tim Harned? In whatever order you would like. Yeah.
So avoided the first chair. Wimps. Oh, let's get you friends.
All right, so we'll be consistent tonight. Tim, we're going to start off with you, and you can go ahead and start whenever you're ready with your opening statement. 2 minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Tim Harned. I've lived in the Seacoast for about 40 years, and I've lived in Northampton pushing 30 years now. I have been a member of the Planning Board for a while, so I will jump into Planning Board issues a little bit right off the bat. The Planning Board has to follow certain rules and procedures and guidelines that the state has established, but you also, look at it from your own standpoint. And I believe the Planning Board's primary tasks and functions are to keep the master plan relevant, update ordinances and regulations to meet changing conditions, changing state RSAs and other town needs, and to fairly and reasonably apply Northampton's planning and zoning ordinances and regulations to all applicants. The above tasks functions must reflect the best interests of the residents and the town by following the master plan, and I believe the numerous surveys that we've had over time to represent how people feel about things and how they think. I also believe that very strongly that the Planning Board must respect the interests of all parties in any cases that it does. This includes the applicant who's there to try to do something, but equally important, the abutters. Landowners have an expectation to be able to improve their properties and make the changes they desire, but the abutters also have an expectation to be protected, to have their property protected, have their interests protected, and have their lifestyle protected, and not be negatively impacted by other owners. I believe, in evaluating applications, very careful consideration must be given to residents. Businesses are important to the town. They're a vital part to the town, but I don't believe businesses take precedence over the residents of the town, and they have to be balanced and work together.
Thank you, Tim. That was almost exactly 2 minutes.
Well, you're going to be hard to follow.
Go ahead, Bill.
Hi, good evening. My name is Bill Kibbe. I know many of you don't know me, but I would like to be representing you on the Planning Board. So you'll hear from me twice tonight. I want to thank the Business Association for having us here. I know this is a really good event, and I really appreciate you guys as a community coming out to hear all of us, say what we have to say. So on the Planning Board, I will prioritize resources to address what I think are our two biggest problems right now, one being revitalizing the empty businesses along Lafayette Road, and then two, being the keeping our drinking water clean. This continues to be a concern that we see from the communities all around us as well. And then to revitalize Lafayette Road, we worked with our experts, and I know this has already started, to select and then implement a phased plan. It's important this is a phased plan with community leaders and with your voting feedback. It's my expectation we will also need to, as part of this phased plan approach, address how we manage the stormwater and the wastewater in the area. Being a New Hampshire real estate agent, it's my goal to help improve the community in ways that help us retain our home's values and to make all members of the community proud that we actually live here. This community improvement goal is looking at the option that allows independent seniors to live in our community as long as they want. I know it's an issue raised in the previous surveys. Understanding and balancing the resources needed for our education for our younger families, as well as reserving a place to have a dog park in our community. Regarding the businesses along Lafayette Road, open storefronts are a strong indicator of the vitality of our community. The businesses we attract have to be those that we need to make our town better and then encourage the people that are traveling through here to stop and spend. The 2018 economic survey that Tim mentioned highlighted people's strong interest in more local restaurants. To do this means we have to understand if the available buildings will fit the need, if they will have to be substantially improved, or even if they have to be replaced. I share your concern that to attract the type of businesses we want, we'll need to evaluate the underlying infrastructure, I've heard this before, and the current zoning rules for the area. The town will need to work with property owners and investors to provide them incentives that will offset the cost of making these long-term improvements. Right now, because some properties are in disrepair, we should be giving business property owners an incentive to improve their buildings and landscaping to better represent the image that we want to maintain as Northampton. We are a community, and I will work hard to make sure this is a community where the business economy continues to grow and where we can look at each other and be proud neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Scott?
Good evening. My name is Scott Baker. I've been a resident of Northampton for roughly 10 years. And I am up here because I am so dedicated to this town to be in here for the long run. I am interested in the long-term health and potential and welfare of the town of Northampton. Not today, not tomorrow, not next week, not next year, but I want to make certain that this is a town that we can be proud of, that is beautiful, that is vibrant, and when my little daughter grows up, I want her to go to school here, I want her to be happy here, and this is a place that I'd like to be for the rest of my living years. My background, I have been in the planning business for over 25 years. I've worked in financial planning, I've worked in strategic planning, I've written more business plans that I can count, I've helped small companies, I've helped big companies, and over the course of my career, I've always been focused on planning. And with that, and by that I mean, it's all about making good decisions based upon good information and making good decisions and understanding what the results and the implications of those decisions are going to be going forward. Once again, not only for the short term, but the long term. And it's also to anticipate that which is expected, but also that which is unexpected, the unintended consequences of your decisions. So I would like to instill a little bit more planning in the planning board on a go-forward basis, so we're thinking about the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And Nancy, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Nancy Monahan. I'm running for the planning board, running for re-election to the planning board, because I care about land use issues and the consequences such decisions have for our environment, our quality of life, and our sustainability. I view our zoning ordinance as the basis for the protection of the town and all who live and do business here. And I've seen firsthand what poor planning can do to devastate a community. It happened in my very own hometown. I've also lived in a city where I saw how good planning can ensure the vitality of a city for many generations. Sometimes the planning board has to make decisions that aren't agreeable to everybody. Northampton is in a crucial watershed. The town sits on top of a critical aquifer, and wetlands make up 42% of the land in town. These are decisions that have lasting impact, and they're not easy decisions. I fully support protecting the wetlands. I also support preserving the town's rural character. And I vote on applications based on the oath that we all take to uphold the zoning ordinance. The planning board is required to uphold the zoning ordinance, not make decisions on its own dreams and whims. Everyone supports growth and progress. I don't think there's anybody in Northampton who doesn't support growth and progress. It's how we execute it that really matters. And I firmly believe that careful, considered planning is the right way to ensure the vitality of Northampton for many, many generations to come. Excuse me. To those who have said that something is awry in Northampton because we haven't developed quickly enough or densely enough or to anyone's liking, I say no. I don't think there's anything awry in Northampton. To those who say that the planning board is a bunch of horrible people who don't do their jobs, I say no, that's not true either. The planning board is required to protect the health, safety, and welfare of everyone in Northampton through the zoning ordinance, and that's exactly what it does. I support what residents want for their town now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
I see I was getting the hook.
No one should think you're an awful person, all right? All right, so we're going to get into the questions. If anybody has a question, go ahead and line up here. I have a couple questions that were emailed, Facebook, Twitter. No, I don't think we have a Twitter account, but all right. Sent to us electronically. I'll start with that, and if anybody wants to line up for questions, they can go ahead. So this one was sent in to us, and I'm just going to read it verbatim here. And for these questions, if you don't mind just keeping the answer to roughly a minute, that would be fantastic, all right? And anybody can answer these questions, all right? The soon-to-be rail trail has the potential to be a great economic driver for Northampton. What are your thoughts on how Northampton can best leverage the rail trail to benefit both our residents and our businesses? And we'll tell you what, I'll go in an opposite order, and Nancy, I'll offer it to you if you'd like to go first.
I think the best way forward on the rail trail is for the town, through its Economic Development Committee, to make some determination of what is the best way forward for what we know that many things are going to happen with the rail trail. It's going to be very important to the community. The residents want it very much. So I believe that the first step is through the Economic Development Committee.
Okay. Scott?
Sure. I have been very active and supportive of the rail trail. We had a meeting with the Department of Transportation last week. I was the only member of the town of Northampton, elected or otherwise, to participate in this meeting and spent a lot of time with the Department of Transportation talking about it. I've tried to keep people abreast and posted about what is going on with respect to the rail trail. But at the end of the day, we have to recognize that this is going to be a corridor visited by hopefully many, many people, both local and away. And with that, there are going to be towns, whether it be Rye or Greenland or Portsmouth or not Northampton, but Hampton, as well as Seabrook, and they're going to be vying for the business of these visitors. So we're going to have to be very proactive in terms of how we approach this. It's very likely that the bike trail will be built sometime late in 2021. They're doing an environmental study of it right now. And we have to collectively put our minds together and start thinking about this proactively. I agree with Nancy. I think the EDC is a great place to do that, but we need to jump on this now. We can't think about this over the next 2 years, 3 years, because Hampton is working on their plan. Portsmouth is working on their plan. And Northampton needs to be working proactively, figuring out, okay, where are the access points going to be? Where are people going to park? What is the signage going to be? And things of that nature. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart. I love biking, and I think this is a great opportunity for the town, and it's something that I'm very much looking forward to rolling up my sleeves and getting involved in.
Thank you, Scott. Bill?
Thank you. Thanks. Those, both of you, I think, had really good comments there. You know, as I look at the rail trail, I think it's a great idea because every community needs parks. Every community needs locations where people can go to gather, where people can go to exercise, to get outside. We need these kind of places. My concern right now as I look at the rail trail coming is, hey, we're not ready. And I think I just heard that echoed as well, too. And we're not ready because even if we do get that influx of people that are coming to our community to say, hey, I love using this rail trail, how are we going to be prepared for them? Do we have the business support? Do we have the, I mean, there's a lot of things I think we need to plan for. And I agree with Scott and I agree with Nancy that we need to plan for those things now because as we move forward, it'll be a great tourist location for us to connect to other communities. And I think there's a great opportunity for us to take advantage of that as we move forward. But clearly, we're not ready for it. And I guess, thank goodness, it doesn't happen for a little while. So we've got time to prepare.
Go ahead, Tim.
I find it an interesting first question. I've ridden the entire length of the one that goes through Northampton.
Wow.
I've ridden the entire length of the one that starts in Newfield and goes to Manchester. And there's also one that drops out of Epping and goes way south. And I've ridden the entire length of that. And it's an interesting question because having ridden all of those, there are no commercial operations along the entire length of any of them. And they're very sparsely used when I've been on them, and it's been in the fall when they're pretty popular. They're very sparsely used, except for the far western terminus in Manchester, where it enters into a park and has a pond and that kind of thing. So it's an interesting question. We have an opportunity to do something. The suggestion that I would make, and I think the EDC, I think this is one of their tasks to run for it, but I think what we need to do is figure out how to make one or two destination spots where people will get on the trail someplace else and want to come and end up and do something at that destination which will attract them and bring them to that point. And then that brings traffic in and out. Because other than that, it's people riding horses, people getting vehicle, someplace they can come up on the road, they can park and walk half a mile down and half a mile back, and that's all they do, push a baby carriage, ride a horse. The other thing not to forget is a lot of these trails get a lot of winter activity with snowmobiles. I don't know whether that's something we want to encourage or not, but there's a whole nother aspect of what can go on these trails in the wintertime.
Thank you. Bill, you look like you have a response. And if we're going to do responses.
If you do that, then other gets to open it up.
I think that's
so it's up to
fine,
you.
because as long as we can keep those responses succinct, can we keep them to maybe 30 seconds?
I can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think the points you raise are great. I came from a community, when I first, back in 1974, I moved into this community that was basically a farm town community, and the town was dying because we had a lot of, especially when they opened the mall, the towns were dying. And one of the things that we found in this town is that the town planners decided, hey, you know what, if we develop the Riverwalk a little bit, and I don't mean putting up restaurants, everything around it, but just having a place where people could come to walk and engage, and you mentioned it, and some towns do this, it was surprising that people were coming to the town, and as it continued to grow in popularity, the fact that, hey, we had this great location, more people came to our town. And more people came to our town to help spend. They went, and we had more families coming into the town. The town grew substantially. So I think that it can be something which can be an out trail that nobody uses, or we can say, hey, as part of our planning, that we look at this and say, how can we use this to our benefit to help make sure if we're going to revitalize an area on Lafayette Road, that this is something that's really going to help us as well. And I may have gone over 30 seconds.
Sorry.
I have a little bit more optimistic view about the rail trail than perhaps Tim does.
I'm
Granted,
entirely optimistic. I just gave you a report on the state.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I am more optimistic with respect to the potential usage of our rail trail going through the seacoast. This portion of the trail is actually part of something called the East Coast Greenway Alliance, and it stretches from Florida all the way up to the Canadian border. And this particular section through the state of New Hampshire is one section that just hasn't been finished yet. But the goal is to essentially create somewhat of an Appalachian trail, not through the mountains, but instead along these rail trails, once again from Florida all the way up to the Canadian border. First of all, motorized vehicles will not be allowed on the trail, so there won't be any snowmobiles or dirt bikes or anything else along those lines. But I think this thing is going to start out slow, but it's going to build. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in Hampton Falls and Seabrook with respect to the salt marshes and rebuilding the infrastructure there. That portion is not planned currently, but I'm going to be working on making certain that we can come up with the appropriate appropriations to complete that section as well. Thank you.
Nancy, since everybody else responded,
Oh, I'm
no,
good.
you're good.
In
Okay,
the interest
all
of
right.
time.
Does anybody have any questions from the audience? I do have another question here sent in to us, but just want to make sure.
It's hard for me to get to the microphone. Can you hear me from here?
I can, but you know what? The rest of the world can't. So, yeah, Phil, if you don't mind, thank you.
I could be a microphone guy.
General, Mr. Kibbe, is that what it
Yeah,
is?
Bill? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
You mentioned keeping seniors in their homes. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. You know, one of the things I do as a realtor and as part of my business as well too, is I talk to people and about their next steps. And what I'm finding and I'm hearing from seniors, and was also in the survey that was done by the town here, is seniors are moving out of our community because they don't have another place to go. And you probably know there's places like there's a Riverwalk in Durham, and there's a Riverwalk in Exeter, but there's not any place in this community that, you know, if you're going to live here, that you can go to once you decide, hey, if I'm still independently living in my home, that I can go to without moving outside of our community. And I really think that we should try to address that as part of our planning, so that we have a location for people so you can stay in your community and not have to move.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
I would just note that a couple of years ago, the planning board introduced a change to the zoning ordinance, which was passed quite a bit by the residents of the town, to allow adult facilities, just as you're speaking about. So it is, we did recognize that a couple of years ago.
Yeah, excellent, right.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Nancy. Got to be careful that now everybody might not be able to get up, so, you know.
Then I won't be able to.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to have one other question that was sent in to us. Oh, there was another one? I'm sorry. Rick, yeah, come on up.
Rick Stanton on Walnut Ave, and my question is to Scott. I've been reading some things on Facebook that have disturbed me, because it seems you're running for a position that you was or are now in violation of the zoning ordinance, in that you have a shed that's in the wetlands and is not set properly from the boundary. Would you care to comment?
I will say, I am not going to comment with respect to my specific property, but I would suggest to you that you should not rely upon that which you read on Facebook. Even your comment here that your understanding is the shed is in the wetlands, that's inaccurate. Much of what's been written on Facebook and other social media sites is inaccurate. I'm currently in discussions with the town in terms of sorting through this, and that's all I have to say about that. But thank you for your question, though.
Can I make a comment? Sure. So, you know, I think that, you know, as we look at all of us in the community and all of the zoning codes that we have, whether we're looking at what happens in our homes or in our businesses, I think it's really important we think about, are we doing it equitably? It also, you have to look at, hey, you know, how we spend our money says what's a priority to us. We know as we look across the community that we don't have necessarily, you know, I'm going to say a zone enforcement team that's as strong as maybe we would want to have. So I think that we can have, you know, zone requirements, but if we don't enforce them, or we don't decide, you know, that they're important, you can look all over the community and find there's different, I would say, uses of the zoning to people's own liking. And I'm saying that quite boldly, and I'm sure that, you know, even as you look, the economic committee would look at the businesses that are along Route 1, and I know it's documented, it was just reported by the consultant too, that there's been, I'm going to say it, maybe these aren't the right words, but it's kind of, the zoning is being stretched by some of the people on Route 1, the businesses that are there. And we have one code enforcement person today who is replacing the previous guy, and we haven't been aggressive enough to decide that we're going to have another person that's going out. So unless we decide to do that, we decide it's important,
Sorry, Bill.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Excuse me, Deb Saleh, 218 Atlantic Ave. I'm going to piggyback on Rick's question because I think there was a little loophole in it. It was brought to many of our attention that you built, Scott Baker, you built a shed without permission from the planning board. Correct? Incorrect?
One-word answer, incorrect.
Somebody else can follow.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Hillier. I live on Glendale Road. My question will be to Mr. Baker, but anybody else on the board is welcome to respond to it. On the panel is welcome to respond to it. First of all, Mr. Baker, I'd like to thank you. You stepped forward to the library, I believe it was last night, and gave a presentation sharing your wisdom and experience with the community. I wish I'd been able to attend, but it was not. Having said that, I must express concerns about this below-the-radar issue that's going on because a lot of people know about it and have good information. Going back to last year when you ran for planning board, I believe, you presented a pretty harsh presentation blaming the planning board for all the ills of Lafayette. You and I happened to attend a Hampton Chamber of Commerce meeting 2 weeks ago, at which we were told very clearly by the Hampton Chamber that the problems out here are no different than all up and down from the Seabrook line to the Portsmouth line. Having said that, I would hope that removes a little bit of the onus that's been placed on the planning board, in my mind, unfairly. In one of your things that appeared in the newspaper, I believe, you talked about the need to reset the planning board. And I'm wondering if resetting the planning board, in light of Mr. Kibbe's comment about enforcement, is resetting the planning board so that others could do what you have been doing. That building is still on a piece of property too close to wetlands and many other violations, and you sit here and don't want to talk about it.
Go ahead, Scott. No response.
So when I say reset, let me read you off what the planning board's website says on the town's website. The planning board identifies the best and most appropriate future development in order to preserve and enhance the quality of life and culture in the town of Northampton. The planning board encourages orderly land development using appropriate plan review processes, land use regulation, and community input. So when I say that I would like the planning board to reset, I would really like the planning board to read through that, adopt it, embrace it, and really live up to what I just described there. I do not believe that the planning board in its current state does as I just mentioned there. So when I say reset, I would really like to see the planning board adopting this to encourage orderly land development. This is what's in the town's website, to identify the best and most appropriate future development, if any. And maybe future development is not appropriate at all for the town of Northampton. As I stated last year, and thankfully Bill has mentioned this as well, when asked last year whether or not I wanted to see new development in the town of Northampton, my response last year and my response this year is, I'm more interested in filling empty storefronts first. I mean, we've got Golden Garden there that's just a train wreck. We've got an empty mobile station. Philbricks is empty. The Epilepsy Donation Center, that's closed. The spot next to Dunkin' Donuts is closed. There's no tenant for Staples. Much of the tenants within the Shaw Shopping Plaza are vacant. I would like us to work as a planning board to plan to see if we can right this problem. And I do think it is a problem. And even though it's indicative, and Mr. Hillier, as you suggest, it's problematic in other places as well, I agree with you. It's problematic across the entire country. But I don't think we should just sit back and just say, well, it's going to happen. I would like us to be proactive and plan to see if we can rectify it. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Why don't we go to this next question? It touches on some of the points that you had.
I have the opportunity to respond.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim. Yep.
I keep standing up here, Tim.
I'm sorry. Have a front row seat. I would disagree with the assessment that was just offered about the activities that the Northampton Planning Board is doing, whether they're following up with what their goals should be and trying to chart a path forward. I know personally I am not a business owner, and I don't want to do any sort of draconian things to take a direction as to what the business community should do. I want to work with the selectmen, and this is what the town is doing. I want to work with the selectmen. I want to work with the Economic Development Committee and figure out what we want to do, and then do the portion of it that the planning board does best to facilitate what we all agree is a good solution. Now, what is a good solution? I don't have any idea, and I think we're dealing with a tremendously complex problem right now, and that's the internet and internet commerce. It is changing the way we shop. It's changing the way we do things. It's changing the stores that we need. You know, I do a tremendous amount on the internet in terms of purchasing. Some people do it for lower price. Some people do it for convenience. I do it because there's a much wider selection of what I can purchase to fulfill the needs for what I have and what I want. And I'm not limited by what some buyer for some local store does. So I really feel that this whole thing that we're going through is a real game changer in what's going on. And it's going to take a lot of work between all the different groups in this town, and we're going to have to work hard. We've been working hard. They're continuing to work hard, and it's going to take some time and effort in the future to try to figure out what's going on. Doing something without thinking it through and half-baked could very well be much worse than what we're doing right now.
Thank you. Missed your question?
Yes, my name is Barbara Colt, 164 Atlantic. I just had a question. I'm hearing about business development. Do you think that these Airbnbs and boarding houses in town are rightfully located in the R1 and R2 districts?
You want to go?
Thank you, Barbara, for your question. The Airbnb situation is extremely difficult for most towns, and Northampton is no exception. As I'm sure you know, the state has very precise regulations on Airbnbs, and there's very little that towns can do outside of those state regulations. Each year, we have studied the state regulations, and they changed them a little bit in the last couple of years. We're still looking at that if there's any way that the town, and right now we don't see a way, if there's any way the town can regulate, at least for safety issues. I mean, none of these places we know, and Barbara, I know you're thinking of one on Atlantic Avenue that's basically a mini hotel. But there is nothing in the state law or the town law that right now code enforcement can do anything about. All of that is to say that the planning board has wrestled with this for a couple of years, and we'll look at it again this year and see if there's anything we can do, but it's very tightly regulated. And I personally agree that the Airbnb situation has exploded. It has a lot to do with the issue of affordable housing. There are many problems with Airbnbs, except for the people who own them, and you know, it's a second income for them. So the planning board is looking at it. Not much we can do.
So we'll go down the line. Does anybody else want to respond to that? Scott?
Just a brief comment. Familiar with the example that I think you're concerned about. I think, just to piggyback on what Nancy said, is we have to be very cognizant of where do we draw the line, because it's one thing that if a couple should leave their home vacant and they go down to Florida for a couple weeks and they happen to put their house up on Airbnb for a couple weeks, and that's it, and that's all that's available. It's another thing where the resident turns their residence into a business. And whether it's used for events and parties or weddings or whatever the case may be, then we have businesses or business being conducted in a residential area. And I think we have to be very cognizant of that, and we have to be very aware of it, and we have to make certain that we're giving it a good look to ensure that we don't have businesses popping up in the middle of residential communities.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, I'll just comment briefly. This is not just a Northampton issue. This is happening all over the state and all over the United States. It's all over Europe. I mean, people are doing this all over. And do we have a solution? I mean, you can see different communities are trying something right now. So, I mean, even in the state of New York, in New York City, they have this big problem. And who's complaining the most? The hotels next door that aren't seeing those residents. And, one of the ways they're addressing it is with saying if you have this kind of business, you have certain, and I would have to look, Nancy, because I haven't been as intimate as you have been with this, but they're saying, okay, if you use your property, you turn it over a certain number of times, then you're basically acting as a hotel and you have to pay a hotel tax. Right, so I think there's ways to address it. I don't think we've fully explored it yet. I think we need to kind of benchmark other communities that are trying to address this and see if we can come up with a plan that will probably continue to allow these to occur, but we're going to have some regulations around them so that we don't feel like it's a free-for-all. Okay.
Nancy alluded to another place that this is going to come in, and it has to do with workforce and affordable housing, which the state basically lumps together. And each town in the state has a number that, based on the number of homes and rental properties in the state and the state guidelines and everything, there's a certain number of homes, which is your target to have that's affordable or workforce housing. And Northampton's number is right around 750 units. And the last time we set really good numbers to work with, which was after the 210 census, when we had all of that data to work with, our assessed data, rental data that we got from the census and the Housing Finance Authority in the state, it looked like we were well in excess of having that affordable housing that we needed. They came up with a number that was up around, a little over 900 when we needed about 750. But things have changed over the last 10 years. We're about to do another census. We're going to get another good benchmark. But I think one of the things that a number of planners are really concerned about is this affordable housing is made up of two things: houses that people own themselves that are underneath a certain value and takes a certain percentage of their monthly income, and also rental properties, which take a certain percentage of their monthly income. If it falls below a certain number, it qualifies. Well, our concern is there are a lot of rental properties that are now going the Airbnb route because they can get more money, and they're being taken out of the normal rental market and going to have a significant impact on affordable and workforce housing. So we need to take a close look at that.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up workforce housing, because I think that this is absolutely something we're going to have to address at some point. As I mentioned, I'm a realtor. I see, right now people cannot afford to live in Portsmouth. They're pushing out to Dover. Dover is pushing out to Rochester. We see the same thing, where they're coming this way as well, too. They can't afford to live in Ryde, so they're coming here, or they're going to Seabrook, or they're going to Hampton. Look, this is something we seriously need to address, because if we want workers in our community that live in our community as well and nearby, then we've got to figure out a way to solve this.
All right, so we're going to do two more questions. The first, I'm going to read off the one that came in here, and then one last question over here. So for this question, what is your opinion on allowing or supporting more mixed-use zoning along the Route 1 corridor to spur economic development? Why don't we go in reverse order? Tim, you would be first. So what is your opinion on allowing or supporting more mixed-use zoning along Route 1?
As I said before, with the internet commerce and that kind of thing, I don't know what the answer is. It's a hard question to answer. You've heard reference, we all know about all of our empty storefronts and things like that. So I think that's where the effort should be, whether we need to refurbish some of that, allow it to be changed a little bit, to be redone, make more interconnection, that kind of thing with our existing lot sizes. But I think that's where the priority is in terms of all of our open space and things like that. To change some zoning laws to allow other use and some other types of development where we would be adding development, additional development on top of the empty space right now, I think it's just getting the cart in front of the horse.
Thank you. Bill?
Well, I'm going to tell you, this is a really challenging question, because if, first of all, It should be part of the economic committee. Okay, we need to look at, again, if we say we're going to have a revitalized business in an area, it should be part of that plan. But two, let's be frank. As soon as we decide that we're going to have mixed use, we're going to have to address the lot sizes, because our lot sizes, you know, if our requirements are you have to have 2 acres for a property, we can't address having multi-use buildings without addressing how we're going to address the infrastructure. And that can be, you know, whether it's the gas lines, or it's the wastewater lines, or it's the storm runoff. It's going to take looking at this on a bigger scale, and just to say, do you like it or not? Hey, I'd love to have it, because I think in a lot of communities that have done this, you know, that's where people want to live. You know, if I'm a young person, I'm an old person, hey, I'd like to be able to walk down for coffee in the morning and, you know, buy my groceries and walk back. I think it makes it very convenient. That's why small cities exist, you know. So it would be a nice thing to have, but it's going to take a lot of underlying thought and potentially some significant development to make that happen if we decide as a community that that's what we want to do.
Scott?
So I wouldn't give you a definitive answer whether or not I'm for or against mixed use in Lafayette. However, as Tim rightly pointed out, the internet has changed the way commerce is conducted in the U.S. and all over the world. And with that, I think we need to go back and look at our zoning regulations and say, are they still applicable in today's society? Are there rules that we have in place today still the most appropriate rules for today, for tomorrow, for 5 years and 10 years going into the future? Because we know that retail likely will not come back. Retail is not coming back to Main Street, USA. Staples isn't going to open up a lot more stores. You know, JCPenney's is going out of business. Macy's is in tough shape. You know, it's just probably, in my opinion, I hate to be a doomsayer, Marshall's could follow suit with all the rest. And as a result, what are we going to do with all this space? And that's why I want to bring back this notion of planning. Let's think about this. Let's think about the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. What do we want Northampton to look like? What do we want the Lafayette corridor to look like? Because it's not going to look like it did 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Yeah, when the master plan, it was about 15 years ago we did the master plan, so we're going to have to update that plan. And I think the surveys we've done have been good, but they haven't really been flowed into the master plan, so I think I agree with Scott on this.
Nancy?
Well, I don't know which to answer first, the mixed use or the master plan, but I'll just say this on the mixed use.
Give you a little extra time.
It is a very difficult question. When the IBR was drawn, the intent was to focus all commercial activity on Route 1. And that's one of the reasons no mixed use was allowed, to leave buildings for commercial use, because that was where the town wanted them concentrated. The second thing is there are 48 residential lots in the IBR, 48 residential lots. So the question is, where does the residential development go? It is a very difficult question, and it is likely, it's on the agenda for the planning board to discuss it again this year. As you know, the village center concept that is coming out of the EDC does propose some mixed use that would require a zoning ordinance change. I just want to speak to the master plan briefly. I know we're running out of time here, but that was an incorrect statement that the master plan is 15 years old. I know that that's one of the points that Mr. Kibbe and Mr. Baker are trying to make, that the planning board is not doing its duty on the master plan, and it certainly is. 10 of the chapters have been updated in the last 10 years. We have 3 on the agenda to be updated this year, and 2 new sections going in. So I think that was not quite the right statement to make, that the master plan was 15 years old. It is intended to be a long-term document, but not a political tool.
Yeah, so can I respond to that quickly? Sure. I agree with you. I think maybe part of the misunderstanding is that it's not version controlled well and documented as to when those things are inputted. So it's difficult to understand what's been updated or not. So I'll take you at your word and I'll believe what you say.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to cut it off on that question. We're going to do one last question, and then we're going to move to the next rate.
Quick questions.
Lou Downing, Sylvan Road. You mentioned code enforcement officer. Do we have a full-time code enforcement officer now?
We do.
And is that part of the problem, that we need more than one person?
Well, let me just say, the planning board has no authority over the code enforcement. It has been well documented and well known for some years that we've had one code enforcement officer. We had 1.5 for a couple of years. I believe that half one is vacant now. The code enforcement officer cannot keep up with the violations.
Well, that's why I'm asking the question, and I don't know. It seems like that's a lot of the problem.
Yeah.
Is keeping abreast of what's going on.
The code enforcement officer falls under the purview of the select board, not the planning board. So I would respectfully request that you hold that question for a little while this evening.
I'm working for you guys.
They're coming up later, don't worry.
My personal opinion is we need more, but that's just my personal opinion.
My other question is to you, Mr. Baker. Thinking that if you do run and you win, what would your commitment be? Because you were on the school board in town and you left before your term was up. So I'm worried that you could do the same thing.
Thank you so much for that question. I'm glad you raised it because other people have raised it as well. So last year there was 2 vacancies on the school board, and there were only 2 people that ran, and I was one of those 2 people. And people asked me to run for the school board, and I put my name down. And if I hadn't signed up, the school board would have been short a person for a year. And it became evident to me that it would be selfish of me to remain on the school board with not having kids in the school. I put my name down on the school board because I have a young daughter, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to start to get active and involved in the school to better understand what this community has to offer with the school. When I offered to step down from the school board this year, I made it very clear that if the school board didn't have enough qualified candidates to sign up for this year, that I would continue on. And thankfully we do, and I know the 2 people that have signed up for the school board, and I'm delighted that they're going to be joining the school board this year. And they have kids in the school, and I think it's going to be a great thing.
You haven't answered my question as far as your commitment, because it sounds like you took your ball and went home.
Well, I don't see it that way. I volunteered a year of my time, and I was willing to volunteer more of my time, both this coming year and the following year. But thankfully, there was other people to take my spot. So I put in a year's of volunteer time.
We'll see what the voters say.
Thank you, Miss. All right, so if you don't mind, sir, just one quick question here, and then we're going to do some closing statements.
Sean Dion, Grandview Terrace. One of the things I am concerned about is that the commitment of this term is 3 years. It's a long-term planning, long-term needs for the town. Mr. Baker, you just mentioned something about the school board, that you put your hand up because no one was available, but I'm pretty sure when you ran for the school board, you actually had a pretty solid plan in your mind that you were going to shrink the school, because you looked at that we didn't have enough kids being born. We didn't have enough children coming in and registering with the town. So your kind of thought process was to bring the school down. So you didn't have a plan coming into being on the school board? It was something you just volunteered for? I just want to make sure I'm understanding that.
When you say I had a plan to bring the school down, could you articulate?
Bring the size of the school down because of the lack of children we had being born. You were using the numbers for the town registrant of all newborns to say that the actual, we're not going to have this many kids anymore, when we were bottoming out at about 350 kids where we used to have 450.
Yeah, that's a complete misinterpretation of my position.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so
if you want to go ahead for.
My concern was that enrollment within the town has been declining for 20 years. The enrollment in the school is down roughly 30% in the last 10 years. And my concern is that we have a school population that continues to decline, and I want to make certain that our school system continues to be a viable school system. So I'm actually more interested in getting enrollment up. So as a
All right. Thank you for all the questions. We're going to go right into closing statements here. Nancy, why don't we go, we're going to go in opposite order of where we started with opening statements. So Nancy, if you don't mind starting us off.
I will go very
2
quickly.
minutes or less.
I will go very quickly, Joe, not 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you for all the questions. I have been honored to serve on the planning board and would appreciate your vote to serve another term. The planning board does extraordinary work under very difficult circumstances, and I would appreciate your vote this year. Thank you.
I will just say briefly that I am in this for the long term with respect to the town of Northampton. I bought a home here. I moved a family here. I bought the little train station across the street, and I'm looking forward to raising a family here, and I'm in it for the long term, and I'm really looking forward to Northampton continuing to be a vibrant community, and I'd like to see the planning board focus really on long-term aspects of the town in moving forward. Thank you.
So let me just say thank you for the great questions and for the opportunity to potentially represent you on the planning board, which I would sincerely like to do. I think I want to tell you, I fully respect the challenges that the current planning board people have addressed and how much time and dedication they have and the passion of this community for, you know, how strongly you feel about the issues. So you know I'm relatively new to this community, but, you know, I've always been a member of my community in one way or another, and I'll address that later. And I'd like to be part of helping you plan for the future and where we go forward as one of the newer people with maybe some newer ideas. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I'd just like to say that, you know, I serve on the Northampton Planning Board simply as a way to give back to the community that my wife and I have made our home. We've raised a couple sons in, and we really enjoy living here. I have 40 years of engineering experience. There are a lot of engineering issues that come before the planning board, and I think it's very appropriate. We had to have at least a couple technical people on the planning board that can evaluate plans and look at what's going on and seeing how things are coming together. You've heard a lot of various opinions tonight, but I mean, there's a couple cornerstones to what I believe, and that's basically the residents and their quality and standard of life are the #1 priority to the planning board. We see over and over and over again, even from the first time when the first draft of the master plan was done, that the residents of this community overwhelmingly prefer their small town, semi-rural, seacoast community. They don't want to become Portsmouth. They don't want to become Seabrook. We have some significant issues that we've been dealing with. We have some significant issues to continue to deal with, principally in the IBR is the most pressing, and it's going to be a very difficult job, and the obvious answer is not sitting out there. But I'm comfortable that the town can work together and get to where it needs to be.
All right, thank you to all 4 of you.
I can go home and have
For
a beer.
planning board, there are 2
I
seats,
know.
so pick your 2 favorites of the 4. Thank you very much to all 4 of you. All right, so we are going to move now to Budget Committee. Yeah, you got it. So for Budget Committee, if I can have Charles Gallant, Laurel Pohl, Margaret Delano, Frank Ferraro. And for the candidates, those mics, just so you know, that's for the TV audience. So just make sure they can hear you in the back, all right? So same format here as you just saw, and just as a reminder, we'll do a 2-minute opening statement, and then we'll go to questions. 1-minute responses for the questions as best you can. If we have a need for additional discussion, we can definitely do that, but we'll keep that to certainly 1 minute or less, and then we'll have 2-minute closing statements if you'd like, all right? So, let's get started. Margaret, if you don't mind kicking us off.
Sure.
Your opening statement.
Okay. My name is Margaret Delano. I have been a resident in town for 7 years. I have worked in town for 16 years, and I've owned a business in town now for 8 years. I have 2 daughters. Maisie's in kindergarten this year at Northampton School, and Marin will be entering kindergarten in the fall, again at Northampton School. I am running for Budget Committee because there's a need, and I'm willing and able to volunteer. I watch Channel 22 often. I actually really enjoy watching the different committees and boards. I've learned a lot from watching, and I've become inspired to get more involved. As a business owner, I feel that the Budget Committee is a good way to get involved. As a Budget Committee member, I will be prepared. I will study up on any of the materials that will be presented prior to meetings so that I am prepared. I'll collaborate with other members of the committee. I will be respectful to members of the committee. I will welcome and respect the input of community members. I'd really like the opportunity to be able to vote on decisions pertaining to the budget that are for the good of the town.
Thank you, Margaret. And Frank, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. I want to thank the Northampton Business Association for sponsoring this forum. My name is Frank Ferraro, and I'm running for re-election to the Municipal Budget Committee. My wife, Gail, and I have lived on the Seacoast for over 30 years. About 4 years ago, when Gail and I both retired, we moved to Northampton. We love the natural beauty and historic nature of Northampton, from the beautiful rugged coastline to the rural Governor Dale Farm to the historic Centennial Hall. Along with the proximity to stores and restaurants, Northampton has much to offer. Upon my election to the Budget Committee 3 years ago, I dove into the task. I met with department heads, I toured the fire and police stations, as well as the Northampton School, and I talked to taxpayers. I learned much, and I set a personal goal to ensure that Northampton taxpayers got the quality municipal and educational services that they deserve at a cost that they can afford. I want to continue that work, and I look forward to answering your questions, and I ask for your vote on March 10th.
Thank you, Frank. And Laurel, why don't you take it away?
Hi, my name is Laurel Pohl. I've lived in the town for 20 plus years, almost 21 years now. And very early on, I got involved in the town. The very first thing I dug into, funnily enough, was the budget. I wasn't on the planning board when I first moved here, but that was my proclivity, that's my history. I used to be an accountant in my early career before I switched over to doing IT work. And I learned a lot by digging into the budget. I became interested in the budget because one of the selectmen in the early 2000s made a comment in a select board meeting that said, I have no idea how the tax rate is calculated. And it frightened me. These are people who are and I'm not saying the select board now doesn't understand it, because we have come a long way. When I started here, we didn't have an accountant, we didn't have finance director, and the budget committee had to understand all of that accounting information without having someone like an accountant, like our current Ryan is great and does a really good job at explaining what's in what account, what's in one capital reserve versus another. And so you don't have to do all that digging that you had to do 20 years ago. But the reason I bring this up is because I learned a lot. And what I learned is you really need to not only have an understanding of finances, budgeting, the budget process, but you also have to have some kind of understanding of municipal accounting. You have to understand how that undesignated fund balance works. You have to understand the difference between a capital reserve account or a revolving account and how that affects the taxes. So Long story short, we've come a long way, and I think there is still a long way for our town to go. I think there are some things that need to change on the Budget Committee. I would like to help the Budget Committee have more of a, if you will, more of an explanatory type of a position with the taxes and be able to explain to the taxpayers what you're paying for. For example, you'll see, and you'll probably hear over the course of the next few months, that the construction of the new library is going to cost you, based on your house, X number of dollars. You should know that about every single item that you pay for. You should know how much your fire department costs. You should know how much the planning board costs. You should know every item. You should be able to ask and know the answer to all of that information.
Thank you, Laurel. And Chuck?
Hello, my name is Chuck Gallant. I'm a 50-year resident of the Seacoast area. I've lived in Northampton for approximately 15 years now. Been married to my wife for 32 years. I'm a father of 2 beautiful daughters, grandfather of a young man, a little boy, little girl, and I got another one on the way. You didn't know that, did you?
No, I didn't.
Thank you. Thank you. My background is I spent 15 years as a small business owner. Currently, I'm a lieutenant on the Rye Fire Department, so my background is more public safety. Some of my tasks as being a lieutenant over the fire department is, obviously, we respond to medical calls, but while I've been there, I've been the chairman of the insurance committee, where we reviewed all the insurance policies that are that cover the town employees, and made sure that we picked the plans that fit the town and was able to save the town money. Another task I have over there, I'm also the chairman of the Joint Loss Safety Committee, where one of our tasks are to go through all the town buildings and do improvements on safety concerns, safety issues and stuff that come from the town. Another role that I have there is I'm actually in charge of all the vehicle maintenance, which is in budgeting the vehicles, setting up for replacement, doing pump testing, ladder testing, setting all that up. Another goal, I have another one, another task over there. I'm in charge of budgeting and purchasing of all the protective equipment for the firefighters, the turnout gear, helmets, and things like that. So I spent a lot of time inside of what goes on in budgeting. I don't know if I'd mentioned, but I have served on the budget committee, and I'm currently on the CIP committee here in town. I'm a little nervous when I talk to people, so, but. I've seen how it works on the inside, you know, as far as a municipal budget. I've worked in the private sector, running my own business, and I've worked in the private sector and running my own business. I've worked in the public sector for 16 years now, so I get the ins and outs. So when people say, why does health insurance cost so much for a town? Well, you know, I can explain the reasons to that. If people ask, you know, why do we replace a police car at 80,000 miles when I get 120 out of mine? There's a reasons for that. I can explain, when we replace a fire truck, you know, why do we replace a fire truck when it only has 30,000 miles on it? You know, because there's age to them and stuff. So I can explain to that. And one thing, being on the budget committee, in the past, I found that I was a resource for that, and I'd like to continue with that, you know, if I get voted again. So thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. So we're going to go ahead and into questions. Does anybody have any questions for any of the 4 of them? Budget committee, questions. Come on, there's got to be some. Jeff, step on up.
Jeff Hillier, Glendale Road. Laurel, thank you for referring back to your earlier involvement with Northampton. I do clearly remember stuff you did at the deliberative sessions and stuff to make the budget more understandable to us. And in line with what you said about being on the budget committee should be, I'll use the word educational to the community. And I guess I would charge the other candidates to see what they could do. You said something you rarely hear from anybody on the budget committee of additional town employees over the years have been very valuable to this community. The most expensive part of any tax situation is personnel. We know it costs money. But I guess I would encourage candidates to speak about maybe what they have learned in their stuff in town and say positive things back. The Budget Committee always says, no, no, no. So thank you, Laurel, for setting the standard.
Thank you.
I don't think that was really a question, but.
I don't think so either.
Okay. Right, there wasn't a question in there, right? Yeah.
Hi, Nancy Monahan, Atlantic Avenue. My question is for Mr. Ferraro and Ms. Pohl. Since you've both voted to cut the school budget a couple years ago, what criteria do you use when deciding to make cuts at the school? And if you think certain programs are overfunded, which ones? Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. What you're referring to is 3 years ago?
Yes.
The majority of the Budget Committee voted to challenge the school board to, in their $9 million budget, find 1% that they could reduce the budget. It was a challenge to them. The budget had been increasing with decreasing population, student population, and it was a majority of the board, the Budget Committee, that voted to do that. That was reversed at the public hearing, and we reestablished the budget without that 1% cut after the public hearing. At that time, there was also a contract that was being reviewed, which would have added cost, and the Budget Committee voted to recommend the approval of that contract. So the job of the Budget Committee isn't necessarily to cut, as Jeff said, but it is to look with an inquisitive eye at what is being proposed. And this year, the school board has proposed a budget, which the Budget Committee approved, that is, I think, 0.2% increase. So perhaps that challenge a couple of years ago made them look at where they are, and they feel comfortable with that 0.2% increase.
Thank you. If anybody else wants to respond to that.
Well, since the question was asked of both of us,
Yep.
There isn't much I can add to that because he's absolutely correct. The school board, it had been the majority of the Budget Committee who had made that decision. I was one that supported it. I believe, I'm trying to remember what the increase was that year, but I think it was over 3.5% that year, something like that. So that's why the discussion happened on the planning board, was because it was a larger than normal increase.
On the Budget
I'm sorry, on the budget, what did I say?
Planning.
I forget what
We're
board I'm
back
on.
to the planning board again.
Yes, sorry. I did 12 years on that, so sometimes I think I'm on the planning board still. But anyway, the point is that it was a larger than normal increase. The majority of the Budget Committee wanted it cut, or wanted to, I should say, not cut, but didn't feel that the increase was justified. And it was returned at the deliberative session, and the planning board then voted all to accept it. So, Budget Committee. Sorry.
Quickly, Frank.
Yeah. No, it's gone, so never mind.
Okay. Chuck, Margaret, do either of you want to say anything? No, add anything? Okay. Additional questions? Budget Committee? Going once?
Right. Twice, 3 times gone.
Yeah, all right.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, oh, there we go. Right before the bell, yeah.
I heard the bell.
Can't resist the temptation. Philip Wilson, 9 Runnymede Drive. A lot of talk about the long-term aspect of planning for land use planning. In my recollection, budgeting has a long-term component as well. And I'm curious about this, and I don't actually have an answer, so I'm not looking for a specific answer. But what are your thoughts about the long-term consequences of a prolonged period of declining or flat property values of homes above $750,000 in Northampton, at the same time that we have a rapidly increasing values of homes below $400,000? what are the long-term consequences of a prolonged period of that kind of economic dynamic?
Chuck, we're going to start with you and go all the way down.
Yeah. Not quite sure exactly where you're going with that, but I can tell you, as far as property taxes, what I believe in is, I don't believe in that property taxes can decline, the rates decline. I think what you try to do is you try to keep them level, because it's kind of like a vehicle. If a vehicle is the most efficient when it goes in a straight line. But what I mean by that is in like 2010, 2011 era here, there was a huge decrease in the tax rate. And if you remember, the tax rate went down, and I don't think the town had a very difficult time operating then. And then after that, you saw a spike in the tax rate. I always believe that you try to keep the tax rate level with maybe just a slight increase. Is that what you were looking for?
No, but that's interesting observation.
Okay. I remember sitting here at one of the meetings when the budget committee was there and beating up on the police chief about having $60 in his account left for cleaning products, and they took that away, and I thought that was ridiculous. But I believe that you try to keep it level. So I don't think you answered that, but what you're looking for.
Go ahead, Laura.
I love that question. I have pretty strong opinions about this, and I've thought about exactly that question. I've paid more attention to one side of that question than the other. And what happens when the tax rate increases and you've got an increasing disproportionate valuation in town? In Northampton, we do have a bimodal valuation. So we've got a lot of houses that are below the median that are in price. There are a lot of houses that are way above the median. So what happens is when you have more big houses, those people pay more of the taxes. And what happens when the tax rate goes up, people can't afford the tax. I mean, a lot of those people in those big houses can afford the taxes, but it makes it harder for them to afford them. And so what happens is their houses tend to get devalued, and that shifts all the burden to the other side of the median. And the people who have less value in houses actually pay more if if there's devaluation in the higher homes. So this is always something that we have to watch for as a community, not just as a budget committee, but when home values decline that are at the high end, people at the low end pay more money. So that's my answer to that question.
Frank?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. When the town went through its reassessment, I was curious of how things happened, because I'm in that lower end of where you're talking about, and my assessed value went up 29%. And if you look at the data, what you saw was the homes on the upper side of that range that you talked about, their values actually decreased. And the houses in the, I'll say 400 to 300, 250 range, they had a big jump in their appraised value. And then down below that, they went up, but not percentage-wise as much, but then in that range, those people are less able to pay the increase. So it created a real problem. The tax rate went down, but that was really an artifact of the overall appraised value of the town going up like 20%. So yes, and the appraised value went up a certain amount, but the tax rate didn't go down proportionally because there are other factors that come in. So it's a real challenge. I don't know how to answer your question, except we have to be cognizant of that. And as I said, here in Northampton, we want quality municipal services, we want quality education, but we have to do it at a cost that we can afford. That doesn't necessarily mean cutting things, but it means being vigilant and maybe, example, I'm sorry to drag this on, but 3 years ago, there was a warrant article for a recreation department van to spend up to $55,000. That got defeated. The next year, I wrote a citizens petition article for that van up to $55,000, but offset by donations and the trade-in value. And then members of the community went out and solicited donations. George Chauncey, Wally Kilgore, the Fuller Foundation, and others solicited and got donations to help offset that. And I went and found quotes that were 2/3 the price of the quote that the then Recreation Department director had gotten. So a combination of getting outside donations, using the trade-in value, and getting better quotes for a better van, the town ended up buying a van with only about a $20,000 impact on the taxpayer. Those are the kind of things to be vigilant for, to try to help keep that down. Sorry.
Thanks, Frank. Margaret, last to you.
Okay. If I'm understanding the question correctly, I think that the tax rate staying the same consistently is always helpful, because remembering what our tax dollars are going towards, I think it's important that we're budgeting for a certain amount to cover for all the different things that we need to pay for in town. So keeping a tax rate consistent, I think, allows for the budget to remain consistent and to be able to cover the things that we need to pay for.
Okay. Response? No?
No,
No,
I'm
okay.
just looking at you.
Looking at me for the next action. Any other questions for the candidates? Nope. Okay. So we're going to do closing statements, 2 minutes or less. Chuck, to you, and we'll move down the line.
So I feel it's important as a budget committee member that you're educated on the drivers of the town municipal budget. The way things are done in the private sectors are much different than the way they're done in the public sectors. The drivers being health insurance. A person needs to understand how the health insurance is dealt with in the public sector, where it is much different in the private sector. Retirement for members who are in the public sector, like firefighters and the police, are much different than it is in the private sector. So you need to be educated on that. We need to be educated on collective bargaining agreements, on purchasing equipment. You know, these are all things that I think a member of the budget committee needs to be educated on. That's where my experience comes from. It comes from collective bargaining agreements. I've been negotiating contracts for 15 years. I've been a chairman of the insurance committees. I've been a chairman of safety committees. My responsibilities are maintaining and budgeting for protective equipment, budgeting and maintenance of vehicles. I feel that's a very important aspect of the job. I did learn a lot when I was on the budget committee before. It was a learning experience. I learned a lot more currently being on the CIP committee. So I think hopefully, my experience would be a benefit to the budget committee. I'm asking for your vote next Tuesday. Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you, Chuck. Laurel?
Yes. We have an interesting next several years coming up. Hopefully, the library will pass this year, and we will have a 30-year bond that we get to pay off, and that's my hope. The interesting piece of this is that that's the first domino to fall. We have facilities that we need to improve, to construct, and build upon. Doing that is going to be very complicated. How it's funded, more than likely, will be through a bond. If we aren't careful with where we're spending our other capital items, because the budget is the smaller, it's a bigger part of the of your taxes, but it's more stable than the capital spending that goes on. And that's going to be true, especially coming up in the next few years. So I think we really need to find creative ways to fund what's coming up in the next couple of years. We can't bond everything. We certainly can't. People will donate to build the library. I don't know how many people, unfortunately, will donate to build a fire department. You know, maybe that'll happen. That would be great. But we've got some challenges ahead, and you really have to understand that while the budget is somewhat stable, 70% of it is employee and labor based. And so that's why it's stable, is because we generally have the same number of employees and the same costs. And while it might fluctuate a little bit between the healthcare costs and things like that based on the age of the employees and things like that, our bigger issue coming up is the facilities and things that how we're gonna fund that.
Thank you, Laurel. And Frank, to you next.
Yeah, as I said, we lived in the Seacoast for over 30 years and moved here about 4 years ago. Prior to that, we lived in Exeter. And in Exeter, I was a select person. I was the selectman's representative to the planning board and to the safety committee. And after my term as a selectman, I served on the budget advisory committee. So I have a fair amount of experience in municipal budgeting and municipal governance. And Chuck is right, the drivers are specific to the budgets, but overall, the budget is driven by personnel cost. And that's not a bad thing, it just is. The vast majority of the budget is the cost of employing employees. As I said, we all want quality services, municipal services, educational services, but we have to do it at a cost that we all can afford. And one of the jobs of the Budget Committee is to ensure that the town and school officials differentiate between nice to have and gotta have. I believe that there's still work to be done, and I want to continue that work. My name is Frank Ferraro. I'm running for re-election to the Municipal Budget Committee, and I ask for your vote on March 10th.
Thank you, Frank. And Margaret, bring us home.
I would like the opportunity to vote on important things for the good of the town. I'd like to participate more, get more involved, and watch Channel 22 less. So please vote for me next week so I can do that.
Netflix. Guess we have Netflix next. But, not yet. We still got the select board, all right? Thank you to the four of you. All right, if I can call up a familiar face here, Bill Kibbe, Kathleen Kilgore, James Sununu. And so you know, on Budget Committee, there were 2 seats open. So again, pick 2 of your favorite of the 4 there.
Let's just exchange.
Oh, yeah. Really confuse them, right? Yeah. All right. So, 1 seat open for the 3 of you. Just to remind you, opening statements, 2 minutes. I'll do a light tapping here. Try to not be obnoxious if you're kind of hitting your time limit. I'll keep doing that. Again, I don't really want to use the bell if I don't have to, but... and then questions, yeah, but I will if I have to. Questions, we'll try to keep that to 1-minute responses, and then a 2-minute closing statement. So Bill, we'll be consistent here and have you lead us off with an opening statement, 2 minutes.
Thank you. All right, so I didn't tell you this earlier, but my wife and I have lived in Northampton going on 2 years. And and the reason we selected Northampton is really because of the proximity to the ocean and for really the uniquely New England charm that we have in this town. Of course, I could tell you we love going to the mountains as well, but that's not in this town. We love the winding roads, the old stone walls, and like I said, the proximity to the mountains. With our children being of college age and above, we chose to live here because we love this place year-round, and we really do. And we wanted to be in a place where our children would enjoy coming when they came to visit. I've got all my kids, again, college age and above. We got 2 grandchildren, one more on the way. We want them to come visit. So as your select board representative, I want to tell you, I want to work for decisions to be made that consider each side's viewpoint. I will emphasize using data analysis to support decisions, so it's not purely what my thought is or your thought is. My career includes executing and being responsible for significant project management contracts with cities, counties, and other large enterprise customers. Improving customer satisfaction by resolving technical issues for police and fire departments, defining and implementing process improvements, both within my own organization and helping my customers do that, and developing products that meet the exacting needs of police and fire departments nationwide. And lastly, my career also includes negotiating performance contracts with clients such as the United States Postal Service. With experience managing budgets and resources, I'm most proud to be known for collaborating across my teams and internally and as well as with customers to get things done. And I believe I have that critical relationship skill, which is collaboration, something I think we all need on this board and in this community as we move forward. I have a track record of being active and supportive of my community where I live as a member of a local school board, a youth ministry leader, and as a youth sports coach in multiple sports with when my children were growing up. I'm running because I know I can make a difference in problem-solving governance, and I have the proven leadership skills to follow through and make projects we start as a community, like the library project, a lasting reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy?
Good evening. Thank you to the Northampton Business Association for hosting this forum again. This is an annual event that is really taking on traction at this point and very valuable to our town.
You get 30 more seconds. No.
So noted.
I am Kathleen Kilgore, and I'm running for re-election on the Northampton Select Board. It has been my honor and privilege to represent you for the last 3 years. Over the last 3 years, by listening and understanding the need to do better for our residents, we have worked to stabilize spending on several levels. This has been achieved by working together. On the Select Board, creating a balanced, sustainable budget that addresses our basic needs while keeping an eye on spending has been the highest of my priorities. A balanced, sustainable budget provides a foundation for future investment in our town while keeping our town an affordable place to live and raise a family. I've effectively represented the town in negotiations with both the fire and the police unions, resulting in contracts that passed at the ballot with strong support from the voters. Each contract balanced both the need to offer competitive compensation to attract and retain employees while managing the impact of those costs on the taxpayer. Understanding that accountability in your government is critical, I have worked to have more of the Select Board meetings, including workshops, be broadcast on Channel 22. Citizens have every right to witness their government in action. As an advocate for all residents, I've listened to the concerns of the school community while working to hire a new police chief. Our chief has worked to bridge the gap between the police, the school, the community, and the businesses. We couldn't be prouder. The re-engagement of the Economic Development Committee with community members has elevated the awareness in town to fill empty storefronts and commercial properties along our Route 1 corridor. There needs to be a balance for all generations, encouraging young families to move here while helping the aging population remain. A balanced result can be achieved without high-density development or sacrificing our wetlands and our rural heritage. We also need to improve high-speed internet and cell service to enrich our community and our small businesses and to keep our community safe. This conversation needs to begin. The Clean Water and Coakley landfill remain a priority. I will continue to work with our boards and our state legislative delegation to make sure that we are bringing information and solutions to those who are affected. I can think of nothing more important than making our drinking water safe. Northampton School, the library, and Centennial Hall continue to be the cornerstone of the educational and social infrastructure of our town. Our investment in them is a vital investment in our community's future. We need to have balance of all peoples of all ages. We need to encourage young people to live and raise families here and the aging population to stay here. With all parts of the community working together, we can achieve this. A use of public and private partnerships will reduce the impact on the taxpayers while encouraging investment from our private sector.
Thank you, Kathy. 2.5 minutes. Mr. Sununu.
No, he's joking.
Well, I gave you all those accolades. That took up 30
Yeah,
seconds.
no, you're right. Flattery gets you a lot of things.
Thank you. I'm James Sununu. I've lived here in Northampton since 2012. Like most of the people up here running, we have the same story of we chose to live in Northampton because of all the attributes of the community that we see, that where it's located, the size of town it is, the resources it has as a community, its proximity to all the great things that we have to offer here in terms of access to the mountains and the ocean. My wife and I had the advantage of, we grew up here in New Hampshire. We both moved away and lived elsewhere in other parts of the country for a number of years, and we knew that this was the kind of place that we wanted to live and raise a family, and we feel very fortunate to have been able to find a house here in Northampton to live in and raise our family. I've just spent the last 6 years on the school board. 2 terms on the school board. Tonight was actually just my last meeting as a school board member. It was a very valuable experience, I think, in learning the ins and outs of good governance, good administration, learning where the board's role is, where the administrator's role is, and how to manage all of those dynamic aspects of governing when you have people that have to work together but don't always necessarily agree. I think I can confidently say that in my time on the board, I've managed to navigate those disagreements successfully, and I'm really proud of where the school is now versus when I came in on the board, where there were a lot of challenging issues facing the school, and I'm extremely proud of where the school is headed. After 6 years on the board, I've decided I wanted to run for select board, primarily because as a school board representative to the budget committee and the CIP committee for 6 years, 5 years at CIP, 6 years on the budget committee, was very involved in the workings of the town budget, the CIP, the long-term vision for the town, and I think I've contributed greatly to productive conversations around those issues for the town, in managing the town's finances, in making sure we have fair and reasonable tax increases that are respectful of taxpayers, but address the needs of the town, address the needs of the school, and look forward to the long-range vision for the town.
Thank you. All right, so questions. Does anybody have any questions for the three of them? We do? Great. If you don't mind just stating your name again.
Sean Dion, Grandview. There's always a saying, if I were king, I would. Picture 6 years from now. We've gone through the issue of trying to build the safety complex. We've now moving hopefully to the library. If the library passes, can each one of you kind of give me an idea where you see in 6 years from now we're going to have between the town, the fire, and the police department? I'd like to see what your thoughts are on that. Thank you.
All right. James, we'll start with you.
There's been a lot of conversation around this, obviously, for a number of years, a number of ideas that have gone forward unsuccessfully and have still been circulating around about what happens next if and when the library project is passed and completed. I think the most reasonable one so far is the idea of renovating the existing library for town offices, which allows us to move police, which allows us to move fire and rearrange and address the firehouse issue, which is a critical issue given the fragility of that building and the value of the equipment in it. So I think something along those lines of where we are utilizing the buildings we have in the best manner we can, because I think practically speaking, we're not going to be able to come to a plan that involves finding a whole new piece of land to build something from scratch. You know, there's been the conversations about parcels on Route 1. There was the conversation about the safety complex on the Homestead. I think practically speaking, those types of things aren't going to happen. So what I would hope to see is progress towards the next phase, 2 phases, 3 phases of a plan like that, where we're reutilizing to the best extent we can the buildings we have and renovating the spaces that we have to accommodate the needs that we have looking forward 20, 30, 40 years.
Kathy, if you want to answer.
Well, steal everybody's thunder. I think now I support wholly the plan that's coming up on the ballot on Tuesday for the library. On the Homestead property, a brand new building. I hope it passes. Something had to move first, and in talking with people and my own thoughts, the library was really in the position to move first. They had been planning for it for well over 10 years with donations, private donations, and raising money through the warrant. So it helps that we have a savings account, as we all do when we go to purchase our homes, to hopefully purchase and build this new library. It seems reasonable to me and logical that the library building be renovated for town offices, for the town admin offices. And when I talk about renovation, I would hope when we're talking about that, and I know we'll be looking at all our pennies and stuff, we do that right. We shouldn't do it on the cheap, but we shouldn't do it really expensively. But we should do it with a long-term plan that's where those offices are going to be. I wasn't here when the police station was added to this building, but is my understanding from history of speaking with long-term residents, the way the police department was built with the second story, that they were going to take that whole space. So it makes sense that we renovate that space, allow them have that space, the office space upstairs. And then that allows us to look at what we really need to do with the fire department, because that's the most critically, that critical building that needs repair at this point.
Thank you, Kathy. Bill, 1 minute.
Well, everything they said, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. You know, I always look at and think, hey, depending on, whatever's a priority to you is how you spend your money. And as I look down the road, it's hard to say, until we get past this library, what's our next priority going to be? Clearly, the community really wants a library. I want a library. I love libraries. My kids love libraries. My wife is a bookie, as I say. She, not that kind of bookie, but she loves books. So I think it's important, but if we build a library, we need to think about those next steps. Okay, what we didn't talk about was what's the cost going to be to maintain that building, okay? If we have, and we decide we're going to take the police and fire, or the existing library today and modify it, okay, what's the cost going to be for how do we repair that building? And then what's going to be the ongoing cost? So we need to look at being fiscally responsible as well, and then making sure we look at all the resources we have as a town and say, what's the priority for how do we want to spend? I talked earlier today about revitalization for Route 1, because we don't like to see those stores being, closed. And there's many reasons why they're closed. But if we want to have that be revitalized, we want it to be a town location that we're proud of, we may decide that, hey, we want to subsidize, as a community, we may want to subsidize some of the infrastructure required to make that happen, because maybe that's the only way we can get investors to participate. So thinking down the road, we can't just think about what is the single thing that we think we're going to do. We have to say, how are we going to prioritize as a community, and then build that into our plan and phase that in so we don't have that tax burden all of a sudden, right? We phase it in over time, just like a bond is for the library. We have to decide what's important to us and how we want to spend. And until we get past this next major thing, which is the library, because we've tried to do the fire station before, until we get past that and understand, I don't think we can determine the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. So we have one question that was sent in, and this was directed to you, James, but in fairness, to give you all platform, you all can answer this. While you were on the school board, the school budget doubled while the student enrollment went down by half, and despite that big increase in funding, the school's performance in math and reading lost ground. Given that performance, why should we trust you with a position on select board? Reading it verbatim,
okay,
all right?
That's verbatim.
Yeah, yes.
That is, I mean,
We
talk
can-
about factually inaccurate. The school budget has gone from about $8 million to about $9 million in my 6 years on the board. I don't have the exact numbers, but it certainly has not doubled. Enrollment has gone from about 425 to about 340, so it hasn't fallen in half. So I'm not sure who's sending that question, but they don't really know much about the school. Perhaps they should have come to some of our school board meetings and listened to what we were talking about. The school budget has gone up at less than inflation, often far less, on average over the 6 years. We've had years where it's actually gone down. The past year it's gone up by 0.23%. This is despite the fact that we have contractual increases in salary, we have unavoidable increases in health care costs. As enrollment has gone down, we have taken action to reflect the size of the staff of the school. Commensurate with that, our number of classrooms has gone from 26 and a half, including a half-time kindergarten, down to 22. We've restructured the middle school from 9 classrooms to 7 classrooms, 8 classrooms. Drawing a blank there. So we have managed the school around the decline in enrollment very appropriately. We've turned some positions into half-time positions to meet lower enrollment. We've addressed, I think, everything that the school needs to provide our students in a responsible way. So I'm very proud of where the school is. I'm very proud of what we've done in the school. I'm proud of the work that's been done on curriculum development. I'm proud of the work that's been done on communication with parents. I'm proud of the work that's done on climate and culture and improving morale in the school. I'm very proud of the staff and administration that the school has right now. So I don't think there's anything I need to refute in terms of that. So I frankly object to the premise of the question, given the person's completely inaccurate information.
I read that verbatim, so you had the opportunity to.
I understand that.
Yeah, okay. Do either of you want to comment or add to?
I really
You don't
can't
have
speak
to.
to
You don't
it
have to.
because I'm not at the school, but, I mean, all I can say is I would like to see how the town can, the select board in the town can work to help the school community and bring families to our town, because it is a good school. It has been a good school in the past. So I'd like to see that the school and the town work more collaboratively, what we can do to grow and it's going to be hard because, as we know, New Hampshire is aging in population, but what can we do to help bring young people and families here to town?
Well, I absolutely agree with you. It would be wonderful to have more young families come into our schools. I mean, I was on the school board before where we faced similar situations where there's a reduction in the enrollment. And, it presents a lot of challenges to the school board, as you stated. as to how do you address that. I will say, in spite of all that, we have some of the highest test scores in the state in this community. So I think that speaks volumes to why people would want to be here. And so I think the larger issue is, why aren't people moving here, younger families? It really goes back to housing and jobs, and that's the real reason, right? So in that regard, I think this, you guys have done well on the school board, and we just need to look at kind of the bigger issues. It says, how do we get more families in here, as Kathy said, so we can have them in our great schools.
Great. Come on down.
My name is Shep Kroner. I live on 5 Cedar Road in Northampton. My question is for Kathy Kilgore. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Shep. How are you?
Good. So my question is, why should Northampton citizens trust your leadership regarding municipal facilities when you fought so hard against a $5.9 million municipal complex that addressed all the town's needs, and today we find ourselves with a proposal for $3.9 million covering just the library?
Thank you, Shep. That's a really good question, and I appreciate the opportunity to address it. In regards to the campus, it was a whole campus facility.
Yep.
And he didn't see prudently financially sound at that point to make that decision. And there were a lot of discussions out in the community about wanting it to do in a phased approach so that people could understand and feel confident that they could afford improving our facilities. So that is why I did not support the campus facility.
Thank you.
And we're in a phased approach now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional comments from the two of you, if you want to add quickly?
I'll just say, I was supportive of that facility, that the campus approach when it was proposed. It seemed like it was a lot of value for the guaranteed maximum price that was offered at the time. Obviously, the town rejected it. I think my preferred approach would have been to try 1 or 2 more times with the same approach. I think we've seen that in a number of communities around here when these projects go forward. We saw it with the school renovation. These things sometimes take several tries to convince people that it might be the best way to go forward. That didn't happen. That being said, I think the phased approach right now that's happening is probably the most practical solution we're going to get. I'll give credit to Frank Ferraro for pointing out at the deliberative session the compromise that, if everyone is a little bit unhappy with the compromise, it's probably a good compromise. And I think that's what we see with the library project, and that's on the ballot now. That maybe not everyone's 100% satisfied with it, but that's what making progress requires, is that we all give a little bit and might do something that might not be our first choice, but we need to come together and do something that's going to be best for the community as a whole. So.
And Bill, if you want to add anything, you're welcome to.
No.
Okay. All right.
Hi, Nancy Monahan. My question is for Mr. Kibbe.
Yes.
Last year, the town did a wage survey, formal wage survey, and I'm wondering if, since you're fairly new, if you've had an opportunity to go over that wage survey. It came out in September, and if you've formed any opinion on the contents. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. That's a great question. Frankly, I have not looked at the wage survey, and so at this time I really don't have an opinion on that, but I would be glad to look at it if it's an important thing that we need to do as part of the select board.
Next question.
Jane Besh, this is for Mr. Sununu. You have been a decision maker on the school board and the budget committee and the capital improvements committee. What kind of analyses have you used that you would now translate into decisions that the select board makes, which are a broader scope than those other three?
I would say, I mean, obviously a big part of the select board is that the budgetary stuff that we deal with on the budget committee, and to some degree the CIP is looking at those numbers too. But you know, a lot of that is long-range planning, and I think there's a lot of back and forth that goes on something like the CIP that informs your ability to make a decision about, you know, what's the best long-range plan. You come in there with a certain set of ideas, you hear from other people, you make some changes, they make some changes, and that's how the collaborative process works. We've seen that, we've done that on the school board. A big part of that is hiring administrators who do the day-to-day work that are very skilled at their job and can assist you. You know, they're the ones doing the full-time work, and it's very important that you hire those people that can provide you with the input that you need to make a good decision. And I think we've been successful with that at the school and at the SAU in finding those people and working with those people and taking what they provide and then as a board discussing it in the context not just of what they're saying as administrators, but what your role is as a representative of the taxpayer and of the voter, and saying, all right, I have to balance all these things. You know, we say this on the school board quite a bit about, you know, we have a number of constituencies that we are responsible for. Students first, parents, teachers, administrators, taxpayers, all of those. You have to think about all of those things. And so that, considering all of those aspects in terms of coming to a decision about what you do and the decisions you make is a really important part of that. And it's weighing all of those together that I think allow you to make good decisions.
Susan Leonardi, 10 Birch Road. I appreciate you guys coming out and speaking with us and in support of the library warrant article number 9 for the new library building. So I just wanted to say I appreciate that. On that note, how important do you think it is for the community to have a new library building, and how do you currently use our town library?
Phil, why don't we start with you, just because
Sure.
James just talked.
Well, I think I expressed earlier that, you know, I think the library is great. You know, I have kids, and I'll say it this way, I have kids, and they no longer accept voicemails, they only accept text. So the way I use the library is two ways. I mean, I go online to find information. I go to the library if I need to study, and I also go to the library, and I have been doing this, to request books, which frankly, our library is so small that they have to come from somewhere else. And the last book I requested, they couldn't get. So, you know, it forces me to go to Barnes & Noble, you know. So I would like to have a library that had a larger selection of books, especially ones which are more current. And that's how I'm using the library today.
Kathy?
I use the library more because of being, as most of you know, I work outside the town. I use more of the online services and stuff, and I've used that, you know, and over the winter I've gotten a few books. I don't have a lot of spare time to read, but I do. I use the programs. The programs are wonderful. They're always changing. They're never repetitive. It's the heart, to me, living across the street from the library, it's the heart of the community. Everyone touches it. And if you're not going in, you should go in. Your neighbors, your townspeople are in there, children are in there. The children's programs are wonderful. I can't say enough. I mean, it's also the business, it is also almost a small little business center. When there's areas of the town that are without power, you find people coming in who work from home just to plug in and actually continue connectivity so they can continue on with their jobs. You have people coming in and using the public computers, and if they need help, the staff's there to help them with tech questions and stuff. With Staples closing, I'm over there making copies and printing up stuff all the time. So I think the library touches everyone. And with an expanded facility, we're going to touch more people.
frequent patron of the library to check out books myself. I love the fact that I can go in there and dig up a town report from 2009 or something when I'm trying to figure out how much our taxes have gone up in the last decade. And I think if, my kids are frequent patrons, I think if they had a frequent checkout program, they'd be elite status. So we're very appreciative of having the library here. I think one of the most important things we'll get from a new library is the expanded facility, for example, providing meeting space. I think one of the things that has changed a lot in society now is declining community institutions. We see all these things that probably most of us had around when we were kids, the Rotary, the Kiwanis Club, the Elks, church attendance has gone down. These community institutions are really important to towns and to create a community. And a lot of those are declining. And a library is one of those things that we can have that actually, retains some of that, where the people in the community come and they overlap and they interact. And having a library that can do more, that can offer meeting space for people, that's easily accessible, that's really important for us as a town. And I think as an anchor institution in the community, having a vibrant library is really, really important.
Can I get a quick comment?
Go ahead,
I want to
Bill.
tag on that because I'm a supporter of the library as well. I want to add one more thing. One reason I really like libraries, and I've seen this happen in the last town I was in, is it really becomes a community gathering place. Like how many of you like to go to the coffee store? I like to. I run into people at the coffee store. I see some people at the grocery store, but I never sit down there. The library is a place where we can all kind of get together. And I think the vision that we've come to a compromise on allows us to have a library and a multi-use gathering place for our community. And frankly, this community needs that. So that's why I'm in favor of it.
Are there any other questions for the three candidates up here?
Bill Wilson, 9 Runnymede Drive. Couldn't resist again. Mr. Kibbe, I'd like to ask you a question because it appears to me you have a unique background with 25 plus years at Motorola. You probably are steeped in Six Sigma process improvement.
Got me.
How can you bring that to bear on improving the management processes and data processes within our town administration?
Okay, that's a great question, and obviously you have some background in Six Sigma as well. So I did spend 5 years in quality as well too. Anytime you have a problem, you try to look at how do you understand what the root cause of the problem is, not just a symptom. And then you try to dig deep and wide to understand what's the real problem. And then you try to identify what are those things that you can identify, what you can come up with to say that could be the possible solutions. And then you work through trying to identify how you're going to implement those solutions once you select the one that's the one or more that are priority for you. And then you continue to measure those things over time. Is this really working to address the problems that you have? So they call that the DMAIC process, right? I think that's just ingrained in what I do is when we decide that we have a problem that we need to address and processes we do to address, if we decide that as a select board that this is something that we need to go do, whether it's on the select board or if it's in the school board or somewhere else, I'd be glad to lend my expertise. And I think that all of us should be looking for how do we improve the things the processes we have to, as we heard Frank say, to try to reduce the cost. And frankly, it comes down to if you improve the processes, you can reduce the cost of the operations. And so I think that'll be something that's always vigilant on my mind.
Sean Day on Grandview Terrace. More of a question for you, Mr. Moderator. I have to come up and address myself. And this is not really going to help anybody here, but for future of these, any chance that whoever sends in a question be identified as a town resident and their name?
We can note that, definitely. Some of these sheets, I don't have the people, though. So,
yeah. Well, then it probably wouldn't make it to you, then. That's what I would assume.
Yeah.
Thank you for future reference.
Yeah.
Can I also add that if we're going to have the questions, I'd like to know if we haven't submitted ahead of time, if we have a chance to review them, that would be appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Jeff, and then I think this will be the final question, and then we'll move to closing statement. A succinct question.
Jeff Hillier, Glendale Road. I have a water question, but first of all, a saltwater comment. We don't have any river walks, but we got a heck of an ocean walk. And you know that. You know that.
I know, because you may see me down there.
I'm sure do. Question on water. I was quite surprised when I heard the figure 42% wetlands in this town. I know we're sitting in an aquifer that supplies the region, or partially. When it comes to protecting the wetlands, as said in the town report, survey taken a year and a half ago, whatever it was, very strong feelings in the town to protect the wetlands, and in doing so, protect the zoning that protects the wetlands. As one of you will be sitting on the hot seat where the buck stops on potentially some economic development, how strongly do you feel about protecting the wetlands from even a wonderful business opportunity to come to town? I appreciate what you said, Mr. Sununu, about compromise, and nobody's happy, but water is a little different in my mind. Scale of 1 to 10, would you each rate yourselves in terms of how strongly you would support the wetlands in the face of maybe some pretty seductive opportunities?
Sure.
Go ahead, Bill.
So I'll start. So it's a great question, and I know everyone in this room has been concerned, and as I look through history, all the candidates that have been elected in the last few years have all addressed the fact that we're on a wetlands and we should preserve our wetlands, and all the surveys going back 15 years to the master plan all talk about preserving the wetlands. I would be a fool to say, hey, you know, we shouldn't preserve the wetlands. Of course, I want to preserve the wetlands, and so what I think we have to consider before I give you a number, is look, we are not alone. Our neighbors in Rye, in Exeter, in Hampton, and all around us are trying to address these wetlands and clean water issues. And you know they have a new pumping station on the ballot in Rye, and we cannot pretend that we're in this alone. So when we look at trying to identify what's the right solution for our town and for the wetlands we have here, and not just our specific aquifer, we need to be having conversations with we need to be having collaborative conversations with our community neighbors, because if they decide not to do something, it has an impact on us. And we have to make sure that we're listening and we're talking to them so that we don't, you know, if they don't act, we're going to really have to act because we want to keep our waters clear. So how important is it? I think it's going to depend, for me, on how our neighbors act as well, too, because if they do not act, it's going to get even more critical. So, you know, I'm going to tell you an 8, maybe a 7, but if they decide they're not going to do anything, then they could be getting up to a 10. We really need to look at our neighbors as well, that we're not in this alone.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for the question. And it's a fluid, as the Wilsons know, it's a fluid situation, right, quote unquote. I mean, it's always changing. And when we talk about what we do, I'm proud to say that we have a lot of people and a lot of committees that have laid the groundwork for protection of our wetlands, and they continue to fight that fight. And I support that wholeheartedly. As we talk about watching some of the cases go through the planning board right now, a lot of discussion has come up on the wetlands, because on Route 1, back way before I moved to town, wetlands had been compromised. So it's encouraging to me that as they're going through the planning board process and the zoning board process, that we encourage, and some are even volunteering to help correct some of those situations. as they come before us for improvements. Right now, we are the aquifer. You know, we talk about Aquarian, and it's their water, but their water is coming from here. It's important. It's very important. It's a 7 or 8, and I don't think you can ever get away from that. And then we have Coakley we have to deal with, which is kind of a political football, but it's the sad thing, it's being politicized when it's so important that we get it right and we get it clean and we make this a healthy place for us and our families.
You know, I could put a number on it, but what I might call a 9, you know, my friend Nancy might call a 6 or a 7. So, you know, opinions differ. I think the important thing as far as wetlands go is, you know, we do have a lot of identified wetlands. They're very important. People in town have made it clear it's very important to them. I think what we're looking at, though, is you really want to focus, you know, when we're talking about development, you're looking at Route 1. There's a number of parcels there that are very developable that don't impact wetlands. You're probably looking at the type of development that's smaller, more targeted development. You know, the big box, you know, I don't see more big box developments coming in here. Seabrook took that crown, and you see that in Seabrook, you see that down in Newington. I don't think anyone's going to infill with more big box development. I want to look for the kind of development that, you know, is service-oriented, you know, specialty retail-oriented, the kind of stuff, as folks are saying here, you know, the online shopping has changed dramatically. And I think with that kind of stuff, you're looking that you may have a small impact on wetlands, but what you do is, you know, I don't think that every square inch is necessarily sacrosanct, but if you have someone proposing something that's going to have an impact on the wetlands, you're going to have a planning board and that's going to look at that and say, that impact is too much, or that impact is minor, or that impact, you know, we need you to mitigate that somehow. And that's how you work with people who want to come in and develop and say, well, you're going to have an impact that the folks in our town are not going to be too keen on. And, you know, here's what you can do to mitigate that and offset that, or make an improvement to some location that maybe is an area of critical need for the town where you have that trade-off. And I think that's probably the best way you manage that, where you're looking at, well, there might be some limited impact on wetlands, but it's done in a way that is overall a win-win for the town.
Thank you for your very thoughtful answers. I appreciate that. And thank you, Business Association.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're gonna stop it there for questions for time's sake, and we're gonna go right into closing statements. We'll go in the reverse order of our opening statements. So James, why don't you kick us off there?
Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone who's come here tonight. Thank you for those who are watching. As I said, I'm wrapping up 6 years on the school board, which I've been very grateful to be elected to for 2 terms. My interest in running for the select board stems from my tenure as a school board representative of the budget committee and the CIP, and getting more involved in those issues that are more on the town side as opposed to the school side. And I am very interested in serving the taxpayers and voters of the town on the select board. I think my tenure on the school board and my management of the school board as chairman speaks to my ability to accomplish important goals and what we set out to do, and to compromise and work with all the different constituencies that we have, and provide good governance and fiscal responsibility and good leadership for the town. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy?
Thank you for all coming and being part of this process and caring so deeply for the town and how we're going to move forward. As we move forward and invest in our town, I think it's important that we have balance on the select board. As I've found over the last 3 years of working with Larry and Jim, we each bring our own passion and our own set of skills. I'm an accountant by trade. That's kind of where I am. I like to look at spreadsheets, look at the numbers. You know, Larry's very strong on the environment, and Jim has all the connections in regards to the RSAs and up into Concord and stuff. So I think when you have people that are diversified on the board but can work together, we can do amazing things. I hope that I have the ability to serve this town for another 3 years, and in the time when we're looking at some pretty significant investments that will bring the town forward in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. And
thanks, Kathy.
To you, Bill.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be last. That means you get to go soon, you can all wake up. No, first of all, one of the things I really like about this town is that the people in this community are very passionate about what they care about. We saw that with the library, and at the end of the day, you guys, everyone was willing to come to some compromise because they understand what's important to them. And I think that takes big shoulders sometimes to do. So I want to tell you, if you elect me as, on the planning board or the select board, which I will listen to you, and I promise to search out equitable solutions between divided parties. Be ready. Be ready, as we will collaborate. We're going to collaborate to make a better community. And be ready, because we will compromise for the right reasons. So my priority will be, because I know somebody's going to ask if I don't ask, keeping our library project moving forward. Then revitalizing the empty businesses along Lafayette Road. This is a major, major task. Keeping our drinking water clean, finding a place for the dog park, and understanding and balancing the resources needed for education for our younger families. And lastly, looking at the options that allow independent seniors to live in our community as long as they want. So while working through these everyday issues that are brought to the planning board or to the select board, I will remember to prioritize the resources for what you say is important, keeping an eye on the bottom line to you, your tax dollars, and to realistically address these issues. Thank you for the opportunity to represent you.
You guys are released.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. There's one seat open for select board, so pick your favorite there. And thank you, everybody, for coming tonight.
It's good to see you.
March 10th is voting.
It's crazy.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. This is just be good. It's just great to be here.
I hope you understand that. I don't know because I don't. Yeah.